Michael Turner had never cared much for birthdays. At 65, the day usually passed with a quiet cup of coffee, a walk around his small Missouri property, and perhaps a call from his late wife's sister who still remembered the date. This year, however, was different. When he opened the front door that morning, a small cardboard package rested on the porch, its edges damp from the early October dew. There was no return address. Just his name, written in a handwriting he knew too well. Tight, angular strokes that pulled something deep in his chest. Daniel. 3 years had passed since Michael had last spoken to his son. Their falling out hadn't been loud or dramatic, it was more like erosion, little silences that grew into a canyon. Seeing his son's handwriting now felt like spotting a ghost in daylight. Inside, cushioned by packing paper, was a bottle of whiskey unlike anything Michael had ever owned. The glass was tinted deep green, the wax seal stamped with gold, the label embossed with foreign lettering that whispered of expensive taste. A limited edition. A collector's piece. The kind of bottle a man might show off, not drink. Michael's hand trembled as he turned it in the light. He had once enjoyed whiskey, in the quiet evenings after long days of carpentry work, sharing a glass with his late wife, Anna. But those days ended after the heart attack that nearly killed him. The doctor's orders had been clear: no alcohol. No exceptions. Daniel had been there in that hospital room when the rules were laid down. He knew. Why then, of all things, send this? Taped to the side of the package was a plain white envelope. Inside, a single card. 2 words, scrawled in blue ink. Happy birthday. No dad. No signature. Just 2 words, standing alone like they were afraid to say more. Michael set the bottle on the kitchen table where the morning sun slanted through the blinds, catching the glass until it glowed like captured fire. He stared at it for a long time, his coffee cooling beside him. It was a gift he could not use, from a son who no longer called, no longer visited, no longer asked about his health. And yet, as the clock ticked on the wall, Michael felt the weight of the package settle not only in his hands, but in his chest, a warning disguised as a present, a message written in silence. Michael sat at the kitchen table, the bottle still glowing faintly in the sunlight. But it wasn't the whiskey that held his attention, it was the card. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, deliberate strokes. The kind of script that always leaned a little too hard to the right, like it was impatient to reach the end of the page. Daniel's handwriting. Michael hadn't seen it in 3 years. Not since that final Christmas when his son had promised to stop by and never showed. The silence that followed wasn't a single event but a steady unraveling. First, Daniel skipped Sunday dinners. Then Thanksgiving. Then birthdays. By the time Michael realized, they weren't speaking at all. He traced the 2 words with his thumb. Happy birthday. So plain. So stripped of warmth. Once, Daniel would have written Dad, even love, Daniel. Now, nothing. Just 2 words, written like a stranger sending a business note. Memories pressed in, uninvited. He remembered Daniel at 10 years old, bent over the kitchen table, scribbling a birthday card in that same handwriting. Back then, the letters were uneven, almost childish. He had signed it proudly, to the best dad in the world. Now, decades later, Michael stared at a card that felt like the opposite of pride. It was a reminder of distance. A reminder of the cold wall between them. Michael's chest tightened, not with joy, not even relief, but with a heaviness that had no name. The card wasn't a bridge. It was a reminder of the canyon between them, a silence so wide he wasn't sure it could ever be crossed. He slid the card back into the envelope and set it beside the whiskey. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, each sound a small hammer driving home the truth. Daniel had remembered his birthday, yes. But not as a son. Only as a shadow. Michael let the bottle sit on the kitchen table for most of the day. The sun shifted across the blinds, carving gold and shadow across the glass until it looked almost alive, like the whiskey was burning with a fire of its own. He didn't open it. He didn't even think about it. The truth was simple. His heart couldn't handle alcohol anymore. 3 years sober, by necessity, not by choice. Whiskey had once been part of his life, slow, deliberate evenings, 1 glass after a long day, shared with his wife, Anna. But that life was gone. So what was he supposed to do with it now? Let it gather dust on a shelf? Keep it as a reminder of a son who had sent a gift he couldn't use? No. Better it go to someone who would appreciate it. His mind settled on Henry Collins. Henry was 60, a man with a sturdy frame, a permanent tan from years of outdoor work, and a reputation for showing up when others didn't. 2 summers ago, after a storm ripped shingles from Michael's roof, Henry had been at his door by sunrise with a ladder and a hammer before Michael could even ask. He was that kind of neighbor, the kind who never arrived empty-handed, never waited for thanks. If anyone deserved something fine, it was Henry. By mid-afternoon, Michael buckled the bottle into the passenger seat of his old Chevy, as though it were fragile cargo. The ride down County Road 6 was bathed in amber light, the air tinged with wood smoke from burn piles. He pulled into Henry's driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. Henry opened the door before Michael could knock. He wore a red flannel shirt, sawdust still clinging to his boots, as if he'd just stepped out of a workshop. "Michael," Henry greeted, eyebrows lifting as his eyes fell to the bottle. "What's this?" "A birthday gift," Michael said, holding it out. "From Daniel. Thought you'd enjoy it more than I could." Henry's brow furrowed for a moment, then softened. "This is something special. You sure you don't want to keep it?" Michael shook his head. "I'd rather see it opened than let it collect dust. Make tonight a special night." Henry's grin widened. "Then I will. Thank you, my friend." As Michael turned back to his truck, the late October sun slid low across the horizon. He should have felt lighter, having placed the bottle in hands that would appreciate it. But as the engine rumbled to life and the whiskey disappeared into Henry's home, a strange unease lingered. Daniel didn't spend that kind of money without reason. And Michael couldn't shake the thought that the gift wasn't just a gift. The house was quiet that night, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls. Michael had just finished washing the last plate from his solitary dinner when the landline rang. Few people ever called anymore. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in his gut told him to answer. "Hello, Dad." The voice froze him in place. Smooth, familiar, younger than his own but sharpened by distance. "Daniel." Michael leaned against the counter, his hand gripping the phone tighter than he meant to. "Daniel." "Happy birthday," Daniel said. A beat too late. Like he'd rehearsed it but still missed the timing. "I got your gift," Michael said carefully. "Well, what did you think?" Daniel's tone carried an edge, light but probing, like he was waiting for a very specific answer. "It's a fine bottle," Michael replied, keeping his words steady. A pause. Then Daniel asked, almost too quickly, "Did you try it yet?" Michael hesitated. The truth seemed harmless, yet his son's voice made it feel like a test. "No," he said. "I passed it along to Henry Collins. Figured he'd get more use out of it than I would." Silence. Not static, not a dropped line, just a long, heavy pause that stretched far past comfort. Michael felt the weight of it settle in his chest. "You gave it to Henry," Daniel repeated, his voice cooled to something unreadable. "That's right." There was a sound like a slow exhale, measured and deliberate. Then the line went dead. Michael lowered the receiver, staring at it as if it might explain what had just happened. The house ticked with the sound of the old kitchen clock, the only heartbeat in the room. Why had Daniel cared so much who drank the whiskey? And why, in that silence before the hang-up, had Michael felt like he had just stepped into something far darker than a birthday call? The following morning broke grey and thin, the kind of light that makes a house feel colder than it is. Michael sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper open but unread, sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm. He told himself the strange unease from Daniel's phone call would fade. It didn't. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Turner?" "Yes." "This is Margaret Collins." Her voice was tight, brittle, like someone holding back panic. "Henry's wife." Michael straightened. "Margaret. What's wrong?" "It's Henry. He collapsed at the breakfast table this morning. We had to rush him to St. Luke's." Her voice cracked. The doctors think it may be poisoning. Michael froze. The word echoed in his mind like a dropped stone hitting a well. Poisoning. They're not sure yet, Margaret continued quickly. In the background, he could hear the beeping of hospital machines and the shuffle of hurried footsteps. He was fine last night. We had dinner, just one drink together, and then this morning, he could barely stand. They're running tests now. Michael's eyes drifted toward the kitchen counter, to the empty space where the whiskey bottle had rested before he carried it across the gravel drive to Henry's house. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. Did he eat anything unusual? Margaret asked, her voice fraying. Michael swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. No, but I gave him a bottle yesterday. A gift I couldn't use. Silence. He could hear only the distant hum of hospital monitors on her end. Then Margaret whispered, almost to herself, the whiskey. From Daniel. Michael's pulse hammered. Yes. I'll tell the doctors, she said finally, her voice breaking into clipped urgency. If you think of anything else, anything at all, call me. The line went dead. Michael stood in the kitchen, the house suddenly feeling hostile, the October light outside pale and flat. He didn't move. He couldn't. The image of Henry collapsing at his breakfast table burned into his mind, and with it, the slow, cold realization. The gift hadn't just been careless. It had been a weapon. Michael didn't sleep much that night. He sat in his recliner long after midnight, the lamp casting a tired glow across the living room. Every tick of the wall clock reminded him of Margaret's broken voice, of Henry lying in a hospital bed with doctors whispering about poison. By morning, the house felt heavier, as if it too carried the weight of unspoken truths. Michael wandered into the kitchen, trying to distract himself with the small rituals of routine. He emptied the trash bin, ready to tie off the bag, when something caught his eye at the bottom. A small plastic vial. No label. No markings. Just a faint dusting of white powder clinging to the inside. Michael frowned, kneeling down. He didn't remember throwing it away. He didn't even recognize it. His heart thudded as he lifted it carefully, turning it in the light. A chill ran up his spine. On the refrigerator shelf sat a mason jar with a splash of whiskey at the bottom. He had poured Henry a small glass before handing him the bottle, almost an afterthought, a gesture of taste. Without realizing it, Michael had saved the remainder. Now the jar sat there, quiet and ordinary, yet suddenly sinister. He set it beside the vial on the counter. The two objects together told a story he didn't want to believe. The whiskey. The vial. The silence on Daniel's end of the phone call. Michael's hand trembled as he reached for the phone. There was one man he trusted with questions like this, Gary Mitchell, an old army buddy turned veterinarian, someone who owed him a favor and wouldn't ask too many questions. Gary, Michael said when his friend answered, keeping his voice low, steady. I need you to test something for me. What is it? Whiskey. And maybe something else. Gary paused, then replied quietly, bring it over tonight. Michael set the phone down. His eyes drifted back to the counter, to the vial and the jar. His gut twisted, a hollow dread spreading through his chest. Whatever Daniel had sent him, it wasn't a gift. It was a message. By evening, Michael's nerves felt like frayed wire. The mason jar was wrapped in a brown paper bag, riding shotgun in his Chevy like a dangerous passenger. Every bump in the road made him glance at it, as though it might spill its secrets before he got there. Gary Mitchell's veterinary clinic sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with a faded sign and a gravel lot. Michael pulled in just as the last strip of daylight gave way to night. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, hay, and the metallic tang of autumn. Gary met him at the back entrance, still in his lab coat, his graying beard tugged at by the wind. Mike, he said, narrowing his eyes. You look like hell. Feels about right, Michael muttered, handing him the bag. Gary opened it, glanced at the jar, and raised an eyebrow. Whiskey. And this? Michael produced the small vial, holding it out like evidence. Gary's expression darkened. You're not going to tell me the story, are you? Not tonight. Just, tell me what's in it. Gary hesitated, then nodded. All right. But if I find what I think I might find, you'll wish you didn't bring it. Michael sat in his truck while Gary disappeared into the lab. The parking lot was empty, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the restless wind rattling dead leaves across the asphalt. He sat there for nearly an hour, every minute dragging heavier than the last. Finally, Gary returned, holding a clipboard. His face told the truth before his mouth did. "Mike," he said slowly, "you're not going to like this. That whiskey isn't clean." Michael's throat tightened. "What's in it?" "White snake root. It's a plant toxin. In the right dose, it'll stop a man's heart cold." Michael closed his eyes. The phone call. Daniel's silence. Henry collapsing at breakfast. Gary lowered his voice. "You said Henry drank some of this." "Yes." Gary let out a slow breath. "Then he's lucky to be alive. And you," he tapped the clipboard. "You might have just dodged a bullet." Michael stared at the ground, his stomach hollow. The whiskey wasn't just a careless gift. It was deliberate, precise, deadly, and it came from his own son. St. Luke's Hospital smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, the same as every hospital Michael had ever known. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the halls too quiet, except for the occasional squeak of a cart wheel or the distant beep of a monitor. He followed the directions to Henry's room, his boots echoing on the linoleum floor. When he pushed open the door, the sight struck him harder than he expected. Henry Collins lay pale against the hospital sheets, his chest rising and falling beneath the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. Wires snaked from his arms, his skin washed out under the sterile glow. He didn't look like the man who had climbed Michael's roof without asking, or the neighbor who never came empty-handed. He looked smaller, fragile, as if one wrong breath might shatter him completely. Margaret sat at his side, her hands clasped together, not in prayer but in desperate restraint, as though holding herself still could anchor Henry to the bed. When she saw Michael, she stood, her face tired, lined deeper by fear. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "They're trying to stabilize his heart rhythm." Michael stepped closer to the bed, his throat tightening. Henry's lips parted slightly with each shallow breath. His hair, usually neat and combed back, now fell forward across his forehead, making him look younger, almost boyish, in this moment of weakness. Michael's chest ached. The weight of what he had done pressed down hard. He had placed that bottle in Henry's hands. He had watched him smile, thank him, promised to make the night special. And now Henry lay between life and death because of it. Margaret's voice shook. "The doctors, they said they found traces of some kind of plant toxin. They're running more tests." Michael forced his jaw to unclench. "I need you to tell them something," he said quietly. "The whiskey I brought, it was new, unopened. I have a small sample from the same bottle at home. They need to test it." Margaret searched his face, her fear sharpening into something else. "Michael, what is this? What do you think?" He met her eyes, the words burning on his tongue but refusing to come out. He couldn't say it, not yet, not until he knew how deep the truth went. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice rough. "But I'm going to find out." As he stood by Henry's bed, listening to the stubborn beat of the monitor, Michael felt guilt claw at him, cold and merciless. He hadn't poured the poison, but he had delivered it. And that was almost the same. The ride home from the hospital was long and silent. The wipers brushed away a thin drizzle, but Michael hardly noticed the road. His thoughts circled the same truth over and over. Henry wasn't supposed to be the one in that bed. The bottle hadn't been meant for him. It had been meant for Michael. Daniel's gift wasn't careless. It was calculated. Michael could hear his son's voice replaying in his mind, sharp and urgent. "Did you try it yet?" That wasn't concern. That was confirmation. Back at the house, Michael felt the air shift the moment he walked in. The October light coming through the blinds looked colder, flatter. He locked the door behind him, then checked the windows, one by one. Nothing broken, nothing forced. Yet something felt wrong, like the rooms themselves had been rearranged, then put back just enough to fool the eye. In the kitchen, he moved to the trash bin where he had left the little vial. His pulse jumped. It was gone. The bag itself had been lifted out and set back the wrong way around, twisted and uneven. Someone had been here. Someone had taken it. Michael stood still, listening. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked steadily. But beneath those sounds, he felt the echo of another presence, the certainty that his home had been entered, searched, touched. Slowly, he pulled open the fridge. The mason jar with the whiskey was still there, half hidden behind the milk. He lifted it carefully, holding it to the light. The amber liquid swirled harmlessly in the glass, but he knew better now. Poison doesn't always announce itself. He set the jar down and reached for the phone. His first instinct was to call Daniel, to demand the truth. But then he remembered Detective Reyes's warning voice in his head. Don't engage. Document. Wait. Instead, Michael fetched a yellow legal pad from the desk drawer. He drew a line down the center of the page. On the left, he wrote, "What I know." On the right, "What I can prove." His pen scratched across the paper. "What I know." Daniel sent the bottle. Daniel asked if I had tried it. Henry collapsed after drinking it. The whiskey contains white snake root. The vial is missing. What I can prove. Gary's test results. The whiskey sample still in my jar. Daniel's phone call. Michael stared at the two columns, his stomach sinking. Between them yawned a gap as wide as the silence between him and his son. A canyon of doubt. Somewhere out there, Daniel was watching him, waiting. And inside his own home, Michael no longer felt like the only one who belonged. The house no longer felt like his own. Every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator made Michael wonder if he was alone. He checked the locks twice, then a third time. The thread he had laid across the front door frame, a simple trick from his army days, remained unbroken. But still, he didn't feel safe. He sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of him. The page from the night before, What I Know versus What I Can Prove, lay open like a wound. It wasn't enough. He needed something more permanent, something that wouldn't vanish if someone came back and rifled through his trash again. Michael pulled a small fireproof box from the hall closet, the kind people use for wills and marriage licenses. He placed it on the table and opened the lid. Inside were the remnants of his life, Anna's wedding ring, the deed to the house, old insurance papers. Quiet relics of stability. Now, it would become something else, a vault for survival. He began writing on index cards, copying everything he had so far. The date the package arrived. The exact wording of Daniel's call. Margaret's voice on the phone. The missing vial. Gary's test results. Each card, he slipped into the box, one by one, like evidence in a trial no one else yet knew existed. He photographed the whiskey jar with his old digital camera and printed a copy on his home printer, sliding it into the box too. When he was done, he sat back, breathing heavily, the pen still in his hand. His life had become a case file. On impulse, Michael dug out a small digital recorder from the desk drawer, a cheap, battered thing he hadn't used in years. He checked the battery. Half full. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling its weight against his chest. A quiet reminder. Get proof. Don't just survive, record the truth. The house ticked on around him. Outside, the October wind rattled the porch swing. Michael closed the fireproof box with a heavy click and returned it to the top shelf of the closet. It felt wrong to place it among ordinary papers, but maybe that was the point. If someone came for him again, they wouldn't just find an old man in his kitchen. They'd find a witness prepared for war. By noon the next day, Michael had convinced himself of one thing: he couldn't sit in silence any longer. Questions gnawed at him, growing louder with every tick of the kitchen clock. If the whiskey had been meant for him, if Daniel had poisoned it, then the truth was waiting behind his son's front door. Michael slid the digital recorder into his jacket pocket, pressing it flat against his chest. He could feel its weight with every breath, steady as a second heartbeat. He wasn't just going as a father. He was going as a witness. Daniel lived in a new development, where every house looked like a variation of the same idea. Neutral siding, small porches, trimmed lawns. His truck sat in the driveway, gleaming, a decade newer than Michael's rusting Chevy. Michael walked up the path and knocked. The door opened. Daniel stood there, surprise flickering across his face before it quickly rearranged into something smoother. Calculation, then a practiced smile. "Dad," he said, as though he'd been expecting him. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Michael stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Everything was neat, arranged at right angles, nothing out of place, except the tension between them. Daniel shut the door. "I heard about Henry. Scary stuff. They think it's a virus, right?" Michael studied him. "That what you heard?" "That's what they're saying." Daniel's tone was light. Too light. In the kitchen, 3 unopened bottles sat lined up on the counter. 2 bourbons, 1 rye. None matched the expensive whiskey he had sent. "Did you try the bottle you sent me?" Michael asked. Daniel gave a short laugh. "The whole point was for you to enjoy it. You know, for your birthday. You know I don't drink anymore." "People change," Daniel said with a shrug, his eyes flicking away. Michael stepped closer to the counter, tracing a finger along the rim of an empty glass by the sink. "Henry liked it," he said quietly. "Said his favorite pour was from the middle shelf, the single malt." Daniel blinked. Just once. Slower than reflex. Michael's jaw tightened. "Funny thing," he said, voice low, steady. "I never told you where the bottle was stored." For a fraction of a second, Daniel froze, like an animal hearing a twig snap in the woods. Then he forced a smile, shaking his head. "You must have. You get chatty when you're sentimental." "I didn't." Their eyes locked, the silence between them thick as wet cement. Michael could feel the recorder in his pocket, catching every word, every pause. Daniel broke first, grabbing a dish towel and drying a glass that was already dry. "Dad, you always overthink. You find problems even when no one asked you to. You sent me a $500 bottle I can't drink," Michael said flatly. "And I'm trying to fix that." "Then maybe don't." Daniel spread his hands, feigning innocence. "Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt for once." Michael stared at him, memorizing every detail of his face, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the flicker in his eyes. The recorder in his pocket pulsed like a witness. At last, Michael turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Daniel." "Dad," the word came sharp, almost a warning. "You keep accusing me, you'll push me away." "I'm not accusing," Michael said, his hand on the doorknob. "I'm collecting." Then he stepped out into the cold October air, leaving his son in the spotless kitchen that smelled of lemon and lies. The next morning, Michael sat at his kitchen table with the fireproof box open in front of him. The index cards, the photographs, the digital recorder, it all looked like the beginnings of a case file. But no matter how carefully he wrote, no matter how neat the evidence looked in rows, he knew one thing: it wasn't enough. If Daniel truly meant to kill him, Michael couldn't handle this alone anymore. He picked up the phone and dialed the county sheriff's office. His voice was steady when he asked for Detective Laura Reyes. She met him that afternoon in a quiet corner of the station, her office lined with manila folders stacked like bricks. Detective Reyes was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than people wanted to show. She listened as Michael laid everything out: the package, the whiskey, Henry's collapse, Gary's lab results, even the missing vial. He expected skepticism. Instead, Reyes leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying him with cool focus. "You've kept good records," she said finally. "Better than most victims who come to me with suspicions." Michael grimaced at the word victims. "I'm not looking to be one." Her gaze softened, if only slightly. "No one ever is." She tapped her pen against the notepad. "If what you say is true, Daniel's behavior fits a very specific pattern: calculated, controlled, patient. Poisoners are planners, Mr. Turner. They test boundaries. They measure reactions." Michael's throat tightened. "So I was the test. Maybe. Or maybe you were always the target." The silence stretched. Michael shifted in his chair, the truth heavier when spoken aloud. Reyes leaned forward. "I need you to understand something. If you continue talking to your son directly, you risk 2 things: tipping him off and putting yourself in danger. From this point forward, do not meet him alone. Not in his house, not in yours, not anywhere. Michael nodded slowly. Then what do I do? You keep documenting. Any calls, any texts, any notes he leaves, forward them to me. If he tries to contact you, you let me know immediately. And if he doesn't? Her expression hardened. Then we go to him. But carefully. The kind of people who use poison don't stop after one try. They adjust the dose and try again. Michael left the station with the detective's business card tucked into his wallet. Outside, the autumn air felt colder, sharper. For the first time, he wasn't just an uneasy father wrestling with suspicion. He was part of an investigation. 2 days passed with no word from Daniel. No calls, no messages, nothing. Michael tried to take comfort in the silence, but instead it felt like standing in the calm before a storm. Too quiet, too still, waiting for something to break. The break came not from Daniel, but from Sophia. She appeared at Michael's doorstep late in the afternoon, her car idling in the drive. She looked exhausted, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, shadows under her eyes, her coat thrown over a sweater like she had left the house in a rush. "Mr. Turner," she said softly when he opened the door. Her voice trembled, but not from the cold. "Can we talk?" Michael stepped aside without a word. He led her into the living room, where she sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands twisting in her lap. "It's about Daniel," she began, eyes darting toward the floor. "I don't know who else to tell." Michael's chest tightened. "What about him?" Sophia hesitated, as though speaking the words aloud might make them more dangerous. Been different lately. Distant. Secretive. He spends hours in the garage, and when I ask what he's doing, he just tells me not to worry." Michael leaned forward, his voice steady. "What's in the garage?" She swallowed hard. "Jars. Dozens of them. Some with liquids, some with dried plants. Labels I don't understand, WSR, aconite, things I've never seen before. He keeps notes, too. Pages and pages, full of measurements and drawings. He hides them when I walk in." Michael felt his stomach drop. White snake root. Aconite. Both deadly. Both deliberate. Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. "I thought maybe it was just a hobby. Something strange but harmless. But then I heard about Henry. I put the pieces together. I don't want to believe it, but," she shook her head. "I'm scared." Michael sat back, the weight of her words pressing down like lead. Here it was, the confirmation he dreaded, laid bare by the person who knew Daniel best. "You did the right thing telling me," he said quietly. "But Sophia, listen to me. Don't confront him. Not alone." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't. I thought you should know." As she stood to leave, Michael caught a glimpse of something in her expression. Fear, yes, but also resignation. The look of someone who already knew her life was about to split down the middle. When the door closed behind her, Michael stayed in the silence of his living room, staring at the fireproof box in the corner. His son wasn't just reckless. He was studying, preparing, perfecting. And Michael wasn't the only one in danger anymore. It started with a text just after midnight. Michael's phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging him from uneasy sleep. "We need to talk. Alone." The number was Daniel's. Michael sat up in bed, staring at the glow of the screen. He didn't reply. A minute later, another message appeared. "Don't make this worse for yourself. Just meet me. No police. Just us." By morning, there were 3 voicemails waiting. Michael pressed play, his thumb heavy against the button. The first was calm, almost reasonable. "Dad, it doesn't have to be this way. Just meet me somewhere private, and I'll explain everything." The second was sharper, the veneer cracking. "Why are you ignoring me? You think talking to outsiders is going to help you? They don't know us. This is between family." The third came hours later, the voice low, almost a growl. "You think you're safe. You're not. Answer me, or you'll regret it." Michael set the phone down, his hand trembling despite the steady October morning light streaming through the blinds. It was no longer the silence of distance between them. It was a threat. He drove straight to the sheriff's office. Detective Reyes listened to each voicemail in silence, her expression hardening with every word. When the last message ended, she clicked the recorder off and leaned back in her chair. "Classic escalation," she said flatly. "He started soft, then pushed harder when you didn't give him what he wanted. That tells me two things: his losing patience and his dangerous." Michael's jaw tightened. "He wants me alone. And that's the one thing you can't give him." Reyes slid a notepad across the desk. "From now on, you forward every message, every call, every scrap of contact directly to me. Don't delete anything. Don't respond. Do not meet him under any circumstances." Michael nodded, though a knot twisted in his stomach. Once, his son's voice had been the sound of childhood baseball games and road trip sing-alongs. Now it was a warning, sharp enough to draw blood. Reyes studied him, her tone firm. "Mr. Turner, listen carefully. If Daniel is willing to poison, he's willing to do worse. You are not just a father to him anymore, you are a target. Don't give him the opportunity he's looking for." Michael left the office with his phone heavy in his pocket, every vibration now feeling like a loaded gun. For years, Daniel had been the silence in his life. Now, he had become the voice Michael feared most. Michael returned home late that evening with his nerves strung tight. Before leaving that morning, he had tied a thin thread of sewing cotton across the inside of the front door frame, a trick he hadn't used since his army days. Simple, invisible, but effective. Now, as he unlocked the door and stepped inside, his stomach sank. The thread was gone. Not snapped, not hanging loose, gone. Cleanly removed. Michael froze in the entryway, his eyes sweeping the room. Nothing looked disturbed. The lamps, the couch, the papers stacked neatly on the table, all exactly as he had left them. But that only made the silence worse. Whoever had come in hadn't been looking for valuables. They had been looking for something specific. And they had known how to cover their tracks. Michael closed the door quietly behind him, checking the lock twice. His chest tightened as his eyes drifted toward the hall closet, the place where the fireproof box was stored. He pulled it down, opened it with trembling hands. Everything was still inside. The index cards, the photographs, the recorder, Anna's ring. Intact. Untouched. But someone had been close enough to touch them. The next morning, Detective Reyes sent 2 officers to sweep the house. They dusted the knob and frame for prints, but nothing came back clean, only smudges, as if wiped deliberately. Reyes herself arrived not long after, her eyes sharp as she examined the locks. Finally, she crouched by the door, holding up something small in a plastic evidence bag. A brass key. It had been tucked behind the shoe rack, just far enough out of sight to be missed. "Not yours, I take it?" she asked. Michael shook his head slowly. "No." Reyes turned the bag in her hand, the key catching the light. "It matches your locks. Which means whoever came in didn't break in. They walked in." Michael's throat tightened. Daniel lived here until he was 22. He could have made a copy back then. Reyes's eyes flicked up to him, steady and cold. "Then we have more than suspicion now. We have intent." Michael stood in his own living room, the walls suddenly unfamiliar, the air colder than before. It wasn't just that Daniel knew how to reach him. It was that he could do it any time he wanted. Detective Reyes called Michael 2 days later. Her tone was clipped, efficient, but beneath it he caught the hum of quiet urgency. "We have enough," she said. "We're executing a search warrant on your son's property this afternoon. I suggest you stay home." Michael agreed, though staying away felt impossible. Every part of him wanted to be there, to see what they would uncover. To confirm, once and for all, that his son was not just reckless, not just broken, but dangerous. By late evening, Reyes was standing in his living room, her expression grave, a manila folder tucked under her arm. "We found what we needed," she said simply. Michael sat forward, his hands gripping his knees. "Tell me." She opened the folder and spread out photographs across the coffee table. The images were stark, cold, Daniel's garage under fluorescent light, workbenches cluttered with glass jars and metal trays. Each jar bore a handwritten label, WSR. Others read aconite, belladonna, and oleander. Michael's stomach tightened as his eyes traced the letters. Poisons. All of them. Reyes tapped one photo with her finger. This is your smoking gun. White snake root. Exactly what your friend Gary identified in the whiskey. Another photograph showed pages of notes in Daniel's handwriting, meticulous measurements, chemical formulas, sketches of leaves and stems. An obsession captured in ink. And then Reyes slid forward the last piece of evidence. A folded letter. The photo showed it unopened, addressed in bold strokes, Michael Turner. She opened her notes, reading aloud the first line from memory. You'll understand why when it's over. Michael sat back, the words burning through him. They weren't just chilling, they were personal. Not a threat made in anger, but a message crafted with intent. Mr. Turner, Reyes said, her voice steady. This isn't just a case of possession. It's premeditation. Your son has been preparing for this for months, maybe years. The evidence will hold in court. Michael's throat felt tight, his voice little more than a whisper. Why me? Reyes closed the folder. That's what we're going to find out. But Michael already knew, at least part of it. The silence, the anger, the years of distance had grown into something dark in Daniel's heart. Now it had a name. And Michael had just seen it written in his son's own hand. The first note appeared on a Tuesday morning. Michael opened the front door to fetch the newspaper and saw an envelope taped to the screen. No name, no address, just a single sheet of paper inside, the words printed in block letters. You can't hide behind them forever. His stomach turned cold. By Thursday, there was another. This one tucked under the doormat. You won't see it coming. Michael handed each note to Detective Reyes, who bagged them carefully, her expression tight with anger. These aren't idle threats, she said. They're pressure. He's trying to break you down before he makes a move. That night, Michael installed a motion-activated camera above the porch. It was the kind of small, discreet device meant for hunters, with night vision that cut through the dark. The first 2 nights, nothing unusual. A stray cat. A raccoon. Leaves swirling in the autumn wind. On the 3rd night, the footage showed a figure. Tall. Shoulders hunched. Standing across the street at 2:13 a.m., barely visible at the edge of the camera's reach. The figure didn't move. Didn't approach. Just stood in the shadows for several minutes, watching the house. Then, as if satisfied, it turned and walked away. Reyes reviewed the footage herself. No clear face. But the timing, the posture, the notes. It's him. His escalating. Michael sat in the glow of the monitor long after she left, replaying the still frame over and over. The figure across the street never moved, but Michael could feel the intent radiating from the grainy image. The same intent that had laced Daniel's voice on the phone, that had written itself into the words, "You'll understand why when it's over." The night pressed heavy against the windows. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep on the porch. Michael had never felt more like a stranger in his own home. And somewhere in the shadows, his son was waiting. The call came just after dawn. Michael had barely slept, his nerves still raw from the shadow on the surveillance footage, when Detective Reyes's number flashed on his phone. "We've got him," she said without preamble. "Daniel's in custody." Michael sat at the edge of the bed, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. "How?" Reyes's voice carried the calm satisfaction of a net finally closing. "We traced his digital footprint. His laptop was a gold mine, emails, bookmarked forums, purchase receipts for toxic seeds. He kept meticulous records. Dosage notes, research on how much it would take to kill a man your size. Even drafts of letters, unfinished threats. It's all there." Michael swallowed hard. "So there's no doubt?" "None," Reyes said firmly. "This isn't circumstantial anymore. He documented everything himself. When the prosecutor sees this, it won't just be an attempted poisoning charge, it'll be premeditated attempted murder." Hours later, Michael stood outside the sheriff's office, watching through the glass as deputies led Daniel down the corridor in handcuffs. His son's face was expressionless, a mask carved from stone. No rage, no shame, only a kind of cold detachment, as though he were observing someone else's downfall. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Michael searched for something familiar in them. The boy he had raised, the man he once believed might turn his life around. But all he saw was distance. Daniel looked away first. Detective Reyes joined him outside, her voice low. His not saying much. He asked for a lawyer. But with the evidence we pulled, emails to suppliers, instructions on extracting alkaloids from plants, he won't walk away from this. Michael nodded, though the gesture felt hollow. The victory was necessary, but it wasn't clean. He had wanted justice, yes, but not like this. Not against his own blood. As the cruiser pulled away with Daniel in the backseat, Michael stood alone on the courthouse steps, the autumn wind tugging at his jacket. Relief and grief crashed together inside him, impossible to untangle. It was over. And yet, nothing about it felt like an ending. The hospital smelled less harsh this time. The sharp sting of disinfectant was still there, but Henry's room carried the faint scent of flowers. Margaret had placed a small vase by the window, a sign that hope had returned. Henry looked stronger. His color had improved, and though he remained tethered to monitors, the steady rhythm of the beeping was reassuring rather than ominous. When he saw Michael step into the room, he offered a faint but genuine smile. "Well," Henry rasped, his voice still gravelly, "if it isn't the man who almost killed me with good manners." Michael winced at the attempt at humor. "Don't," he said softly. "Not about this." Margaret excused herself to the hallway, leaving the two men alone. Michael pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, his hands clasped tightly together. "I need to tell you the truth," he began, his voice low. "The bottle, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad luck. It was poisoned. And it wasn't meant for you." Henry's brow furrowed. "Poisoned?" Michael nodded slowly, forcing the words out through the heaviness in his chest. "My son, Daniel. He sent it to me. It was meant for me, Henry. You just got there first." The older man was silent for a long time, his eyes studying Michael with a depth that made him want to look away. Finally, Henry exhaled. "That explains the whispers I've been hearing from Margaret. The detectives. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe." Michael bowed his head. "I should have seen it. I should have done something before it came to this. Instead, I put that bottle in your hands." "You didn't know," Henry said firmly. "That boy of yours, he made sure you couldn't know." Michael swallowed hard. "Doesn't change the fact that you nearly died because of me." Henry's expression softened. "Because of him, Michael. Not you. You carried the gift, but you didn't poison it. Don't take on his sins." For a moment, Michael said nothing, staring at the floor as the weight pressed heavier on his shoulders. Then Henry shifted slightly in bed, his voice steadier. "You've done what you can now. You told the truth. And that's more than most men would have had the courage to do." Michael lifted his eyes, meeting Henry's. In that look, he saw not blame, but something closer to understanding. Pain shared, not cast. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt the faintest edge of release. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a step toward it. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Michael sat in his armchair by the window, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the yard, settling in small piles against the porch steps. The world looked calm, ordinary, yet nothing inside him felt ordinary anymore. Daniel was in county lockup now, awaiting trial. The prosecutors had more than enough. The jars, the notebooks, the emails, the letter. Evidence stacked like bricks around him. There would be no easy defense, no excuse that could wipe it clean. And yet, for Michael, the weight of it didn't feel like victory. He thought about the bottle of whiskey, gleaming amber under the kitchen light on that first night. A gift from his estranged son. For a few fleeting moments, he had allowed himself to believe it was an olive branch, a step toward healing. Instead, it had been a weapon. The real gift wasn't the bottle, Michael thought bitterly. It was the message inside it. A message written not in ink but in poison. Resentment distilled, corked, and delivered by the hands of his own flesh and blood. Henry was recovering. Margaret had even thanked him for helping bring the truth forward, but Michael still carried the guilt. He had been the courier of his son's hatred, the unwitting messenger who delivered death to a friend. That stain would not wash easily. On the shelf across the room, the fireproof box remained. Inside it sat the index cards, the photos, the recordings, his archive of survival. He had lived through the test, yes, but the scars ran deeper than any file could capture. Michael leaned back, letting his eyes close. He thought of Anna, his late wife, and the life they had once built together, full of promise. Somewhere along the way, something had broken in Daniel. A crack that widened into a chasm until nothing could bridge it. Now, the son he once cradled in his arms would stand before a jury accused of trying to kill him. It was a bitter legacy. And yet, as the afternoon sun stretched across the room, Michael took a slow breath. He had survived. Henry had survived. The truth had surfaced, no matter how cruel. Sometimes survival was the only inheritance a family could leave behind.